Hello, this is a special series we're doing before the end of the year, where we'll be answering some of the most common questions you guys have asked us over the past 12 months. If this is your first time watching one of our videos, welcome! Click the subscribe button right now because we're providing massive value for the following days, and you don't want to miss it.
I'm Swagata. I'm here to explain a little bit about John Milton, his background, age, and the poem, specifically the poem Lycidas. So I'll just begin. Right. John Milton, he was born 1608, and the age he was born, it's called the Renaissance age, Renaissance humanism also. So the word Renaissance is a French word. It means rebirth, and it had started out first of all in Italy. It started in the late 14th century and slowly spread to other countries in Europe and reached England. This happened between the 15th and the 17th century. So there are certain things which are very specific and prominent about the Renaissance age. That is the revival in classical philosophy, literature, and arts. Right. And I'm just going to be reading, and I'll try and explain point wise about the background. So there's in this particular age, we had certain things happening in this age. This was contributions happened in different fields, not only in the arts. You had religion, and the most important, very very important part about this particular age was the Reformation. Martin Luther, Reformation, and Protestantism. This happened, and there was emergence of the British imperialism, the British monarchy. It came into power and it bloomed in this particular age. Then you have certain other scientific theories, laws which took over replaced the older laws. One being very important thing being what was believed earlier was that Earth was the center and the planets were circled around it. That changed to the Copernicus theory of being Earth as just one of the many planets circling the sun. So this was seen in Milton's metaphors and similes throughout his work. I hope I'm audible to everyone, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
you are.
okay, great. So I'll continue. So then there was art and culture which flourished. Why they flourished? There were new areas, new lands being discovered. People sailed out to discover new lands. They established trade relations, and with trade relations, they have settlements happening. With settlements, you have expansion happening. This is one thing which happened, which again, now Milton, he is supposed to be, he is quoted as the last greatest poet of the Renaissance age. So Renaissance and Enlightenment, there are two different ages, but they're kind of, one moving on and with the other. It's a continuous thing. And he is more associated with the first age, that is the Renaissance age. About that, I'll explain in the following paras. So then there were certain genres which were popular at that time. One was the verse satire. There were epigrams. Epigram is, what is an epigram? You'll ask. So epigram is basically like a proverb, a life hacks as we see it in social media. That is something which is an epigram. Then you have essays. Then you have something called meditation, mask, the tragic comedy, pastoral plays, and these were all, by the way, imports from Europe due to the Renaissance influence. And one thing again happened in England was slowly, with a little time, the monarchy, which was established, which it slowly lost a bit of its power, and the parliament emerged. The parliament emerged. We will see again. We will see this will happen during Milton's years, his entire growth. The monarchy is slowly it's taken over by parliament, which becomes more and more powerful until the monarchy doesn't have the absolute power that it had before. Okay, we have certain things happening which caused a lot of upheaval. You have Charles I, who was captured and he was executed. Then Declaration of England. England was declared as a republic. It was called the Commonwealth. That is what we know England is now, the Commonwealth. So that's when it happened. Charles II returned in 1660. The Glorious Revolution of 1688. 1688, it's called the Glorious Revolution. Now, I'd like to mention a couple of things about this. This is a very important age. 1688, this time, it was also called a bloodless revolution. It was bloodless in England, yes, not in other places like Ireland and Scotland, where there was a lot of bloodshed. But why is it important? So you have the Catholic king, King James II. He was replaced by his Protestant daughter Mary and Dutch husband William of Orange. They took over. They took over as two monarchs. They were accepted as king and queen, and they also accepted restrictions which were placed by the parliament. There were these laws which were not there before. Parliament emerged and said that you cannot be an absolute ruler, and we will have certain terms and conditions which you have to abide by, even though you are king and queen. So that's what happened, right? And this is a significant event, and Britain got transformed from being, again, like I said, from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. So they would, after this was the last time where Britain would have absolute monarchy, and Britain after this would never have that. Right. Okay. Then, yeah, changes were visible in the political and social structure. Cities and towns, travel happened. They become centers of proto-social ideas, basically new ideas. You have Puritanism. You have groups like Quakers and Diggers. Those were the people, very prominent people. And these ideologies, they challenged the ideologies which were existing in place at that time. They challenged the political authority of the people who were there at that time. And private property, which had very rigid rules, that the rules regarding private property also kind of were a little more relaxed, and it changed. And relationship between the sexes also changed. Women started taking more active interest in civil unrest, pamphlets and leaflets. They kind of like how we have morchas over here, something like that happened. And they started going into male dominated areas, like being preachers, Puritan preachers. Earlier, they used to be only males. So women also took part in this, and they shook up the system, the patriarchy system. They shook that up. And I'll just read out a couple of features which belong to Renaissance. So we might have a question. So I'll just quickly go through this. So it refers to renewal of learning, interest, renewed interest, revival in the classical antiquity. Whatever was old, okay, changes in ideas, absolutely new, radical changes in ideas about religion, politics, and science. Rise in humanist philosophy. Humanist philosophy is what? What is humanist philosophy? It's individual dignity, belief in sense, self and human worth, the worth of my own self, and also humanism has is also associated with the benevolence, compassion, mercy, and some assertive qualities like judgment, prudence, eloquence, fortitude. These are some of the features of Renaissance. Okay, right. Now we'll just do a little bit about the poet John Milton. And he was born at 1608. He was born. He studied a very vast curriculum: Latin, Greek, Hebrew at St. Paul's. He was an avid reader. He was an avid reader, which was why he went blind in later on in his life. And he learned several languages from private tutors, and read up on subjects like politics, religion, philosophy, history, astronomy, geography, mathematics, and music. Music played a very, very important part in his poems. In his works, there he is known for his lyricism and his musicality. Okay, he also decided at a very early age to be a poet and a humanist scholar. Milton was supposed to be very good looking. He had fine features and he was nicknamed the lady at Cambridge. So he was in his youth, he was, he was drawn to the typical things which in youth you do, uh, sensual, being a sensual person. But he gave it up pretty quickly for his ambition in becoming a poet. And there is a reference to this, the chaste lady in the Mask Comus. Comus is the poem. The lady refuses to give into temptation, which is Milton, the poet's own sentiment. Right. Milton was heavily influenced by the Bible. He is not typically a religious person, and this is seen very directly sometimes and even indirectly in his works. It wasn't just, material for his narratives, but for him, the Bible was the reason, the explanation given in the Bible, the existence of humanity. The Bible for him contained all that. And like I said before, scholastic learning, he had little love for that, but he was more interested in blending his beliefs of Christianity with Platonism and classism. There's always going to be this particular war in Milton between Christianity and uh, humanism. So that we will see again later. And he developed his maturity as a poet, his poetic style, his tendencies which were there as his musicality, like I said, or he was a very erudite, that means a very learned person. So that all, his love for myth, it's all you know uh, expressed in his poetry. um, the religious themes, control over form and meter, this is seen in the poems on the morning of Christ's nativity, l'Allegro, il penseroso. And right. So Milton, between 1641 and 1645, he is known for his prose. He is very, very well known for his prose, not just poetry. He's written pamphlets on church reform, divorce, censorship, and he participated in debates. During this period, he kept aside his poetic aspirations and devoted himself to writing all this, because he was very, very disenchanted with the ongoing politics, the corruption in the clergy, the incompetency of the clergy, contemporary clergy. So he was quite concerned about the need to protect individual speech and dignity. That again is a very important part of Renaissance, the individuality. And he was all for condemning tyranny of any kind. He demanded the separation of religion and politics. And career wise, he served as a civil servant to the Commonwealth of England under its Council of State under Oliver Cromwell. There's a poetry on that also. Then by 1652, he was completely blind, and his wife passed away the same year. And his third wife, I haven't mentioned her name over here. It's there in the study material, by the way. She and his daughters helped him write Paradise Lost. Okay, who are the influences of Milton? Very, very important. Virgil was one of them. Virgil was a model for his pastoral and epic poems, which are used in Lycidas and l'Allegro. Cicero was very, very prominent for the prose writers. Everyone looked up to Cicero for writing prose. Milton also was fascinated with Ovid, Ovidian and Roman poetry, and his Ovid's Metamorphoses. He has been inspired by the Metamorphoses and the allegorical situations which and ideas which are found in his poetry. That is reflected from Metamorphoses. He might have derived the idea of writing in blank verse. This is again not a hard fact. He might have done it from 16th century poets like Bembo, Della Casa, and Tasso. Then he later got interested in the idealism of Dante, Petrarch, and Spencer. and he was a huge devotee, I would say, of Spencer. He kind of thought himself to be Spencer's most biggest fan, if you could call it that. And his style, he loved his style. His poets, the Spencer's influence can be seen in his poems, and his sensual writing, which is reflected in On the Death of a Fair Infant and at a Vatican Exercise, which is in 1628. Yeah, his third wife, Elizabeth Munchell, and daughters took up the dictation of Paradise Lost in 1667. It was published. And right, Samson Agonistes, Paradise Regained in 1671. This was, yeah, 1674, Milton passed away. He died of gout. Okay, he, like I said before, he believed himself to be a true successor of Edmund Spencer. He he considered Spencer to be, he is, I mean, Milton is considered to be one of the most important and influential poets in the English language after Shakespeare. He influenced people like poets like Percy B. Shelley, W.B. Yeats, Wordsworth. And he always tried to combine classical heritage of the Renaissance with the spirit of the Reformation. And he was very patriotic. He was very patriotic. He wanted to always retain and his be true to English roots. So his style or voice, it is in the ability of infusing, combining musicality into his poets. Yeah, and this is what separates him from the other poets of that age or any other age. Now I'll talk a bit about Lycidas, the poem. So it shows Lycidas shows Milton's awareness of his ambition. He always wanted to be, his first and foremost reason of writing, doing poetry, most important of being becoming a poet, his ambition and everything was in the service of Christianity. His for that, that was very important for him. So he advocated for religious autonomy, basically wanting no interference from clergy. He wanted to say that, you are free to choose your own religion and the way you believe it should be, instead of obeying a certain law placed by a certain church or something. So, and for him, Bible had the answer. The Bible had the answer, and the only true answer, according to Milton, to any question which is posed by classical literature or philosophy. So he does take a lot from the Renaissance and the Reformation discourses of humanism and individualism. Right, and he was devoted to music. He was very he tried to imbibe music in his works, and we see that in his, in the language, in the meter, in the structure of the poems that he's written. Okay, he sought to influence public opinion and political and social change with his prose, mainly with his prose, and the individual's rights, whether it's political, religious, or economic, in relation to the existing forms of authority. This is reflected in his epic Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is a very political poem. And his poem Lycidas, he tackles the incompetent shepherds, the clergy of anti Protestantism, in a very harsh manner. These are the lines: the hungry sheep look up and are not fed, but swollen with wind. It's lines 125 to 127. Please do look it up. This poem, Lycidas, was a poem of the series called Justa Eduardo King Naufrago. Right? It was commemorating the death of his friend Edward King, 1637, a college mate of his at Cambridge. And I'll just quickly go through his other works. He has done Comus, which is a masque. A masque is a dramatic poet. It's a dramatic poem which is staged sometimes with musical accompaniment. And one example is I've given is Shelley's Mask of Anarchy is one of those. So Lycidas is his other work is a pastoral elegy, and There is a collection of his best poems. It's poems 1645, which includes certain poems like L'Allegro, Il Penso Rosso, and On the Morning of Christ's Nativity, and Comus, which is in and other poems. Sorry, other poems in Greek and Latin, and there are sonnets in Italian. Paradise Lost was in 1667. It is in 10 books. It's built up on, like I said, political analogies. Paradise Regained was 1671. The premises Satan's temptation of Christ in the desert. Samson Agonistes is 1671. It is based on a Greek tragedy, and it is said that Milton's personal experiences are infused with the poem. So I'll just go on with Lycidas. Summary of Lycidas. Lycidas was written in 1637. It's a pastoral elegy, and Milton, he questions the worth of a transient life. Transient is a fleeting, short life. It's there today and tomorrow you're gone. You don't know how long you have to live. This poem has got 193 lines. It is in irregular rhyme, and many of his poems are in Greek and Latin, but this particular one is in English. Lycidas, it begins as a lament, a monody. A monody is a lament, and it has one particular speaker. It starts off with one speaker, as it should be with a monody. But in this poem, this he has been criticized for this also. It expands to include a chorus of voices. You have Apollo, you have a group of sea gods, Triton and his winds, Saint Peter and the shepherd, the speaker, main speaker, whose elegy gets displaced. The poem is about memories of his dear friend Edward King. He passed away after drowning in a shipwreck off the coast of Anglesey. His friend King had planned to take up holy orders, join the clergy, and he uses pastoral allegory in the religious context too over here. And the poem begins with the invocation of the muses and holy spirits. And Milton declares his intention of writing this poem. He remembers about the cherished times he spent with his friend, and the poem ends with a description of his death. Uh, King is characterized as a shepherd, caring for a sheep. Now, sheep, again, this is a very, very familiar an analogy applied to Christ. Christ is called the shepherd who leads his sheep, sheep being followers, the Christian followers. They are the sheep. So, the poet is addressing a series of ancient figures here, like the sun god Apollo, Saint Peter, the nymphs, and the muses. He hopes to find out if anyone witnessed the death of his friend, but he fails to do so. And he, of course, questions them. He's angry, he is disturbed. He realizes, but then his friend has died. He his time was up. He was destined to go. So Milton is quite mournful, and he says his friend was very exceptional in his work and selfless. And it's a sad thing that he died. He left this world without realizing any of his goals. But Milton also realizes and accepts that this is life, or the world is transient. You don't know when you have to go, but nobody is immortal. Everybody is mortality. And his friend is not alone wherever he is. He is in the company of holy saints, and therefore the poem, beginning on the mournful note, ends on a better note, a more positive note than the start. The poem has got many themes. There is mortality, which is inescapable. You can't escape mortality. Everyone has to die one day. That's the and the pointlessness of poetic ambition. So ambition, how much ever ambitious you might be, you don't know how much time you have to live. So you might realize your ambitions or not. So that is there, and you do have pleasures which are there when you are mortal, but you also have the everlasting spiritual joy in Christianity. So when you are when you are gone to a better place, you will find spiritual joy that is mentioned, that is kind of felt in the poem and the in the end of the poem. Lycidas involves shepherds, nature, and elements. as it is in a pastoral elegy. The mood begins with the speaker angry and grief stricken. He is mourning, lamenting the loss of his friend, Edward King. He blames the gods and Holy Spirit for not able to help his friend, not coming to his friend's help. He questions the useless rules we follow and through life, but which is cut short by death. And I mean, what is the use of these rules when you know you're going to die anyway? He remains mournful. The mood is mournful, but it changes and is hopeful and even joyous that he knows his friend is in a better place. So we are left with that impression. And the poet who loves his friend, that impression is also, we, the readers, we get that. Okay, the style is pastoral elegy. It's a genre. It was begun by Theocritus and it was made famous by Virgil and Spenser. The This poem particularly, it employs the rhyme and meter of an Italian canzone. Canzone is a medieval love poem. So Milton is struggling between his attraction for the classical traditions, like I said, and that of Christianity. So he tries to fuse both of them in his poem. And the tension, as the change of the form in the from the first stanza to the other sections, that is there in the poem. Okay, the poem uses Pindaric ode. This is a form of ode with three stanza sections, first and second stanza having one metrical form, and the third having a different form. Okay, and then we have the tone. The poem has got a expression of grief, anger at the futility of his friend's death, and the conclusion is joyous. Okay, and moving on, poetic devices. Milton called the poem a monody. Poem is written for a speaker, a lament. The meter in the poem shuffles back and forth between iambic pentameter, five groups of iambs. What is an iamb? An iamb is got a feet. A feet is got stressed, unstressed. One stress, one unstress. That is a feet. Two syllables make a feet. You have iambs and an iambic trimester. Trimeter, sorry, that's a typo, wrong. Three groups of iambs. So it's shuffling between iambic pentameter and iambic trimeter. And you have synocope. Synocope is omitting letters. It's a poetic license, you can say. It's kind of a poetic license. Poetic license where you omit letters in a particular word just for the sake of rhyme. And the form and meter of the poem is iambic pentameter, like I said. Iamb is just given this thing for you to read, and right, total of 10 syllables. Assonance is a repetition of vowel sounds in the same line. The sound of the line, for we were nursed upon the self same hill. Yeah, the for we were nursed upon the self same hill. That is an assonance. And again in weep no more, woeful shepherd, weep no more. Allusion, there's a lot of allusions, and just given a couple of examples here. Milton is alluding to the idea of the story of Orpheus, how he died in the this particular stanza, the lines 58 and 59. What could the muse herself that Orpheus bore, the muse herself for her enchanting son, whom universal nature did lament? So we are alluding to the story of Orpheus. Uh, and then again, Phoebus replied and touched my trembling ears. Fame is no plant that grows on mortal soil, nor in the glistening foil. So Phoebus is, of course, Apollo. Apollo tells the speaker to be calm regarding fame. Apollo touches the poet's ears. It's an allusion over here to Virgil, who influenced, like I said, who influenced Milton a lot. Virgil's Eclogues. Eclogues is his work. In that also, you have a speaker who is similarly reprimanded by Apollo, the same god. You have alliteration and with wild thyme and the gadding vine overgrowth, and fame is the spur that the clear spirit doth raise. And then you have antimeria. Antimeria is a conversion of a word from one grammatical form to another. Remember, it's a form. Like if you have a noun which is used as a verb, over here we have purple all the grounds with vernal flowers. Purple is just a color, actually. So purple is a noun like green, black, white, but it's used to make purple, to make purple, to make it purple. You make the ground purple with the flowers, so it's used as a verb. Then you have Catachresis. Catachresis is a conversion of a word into an unexpected form. Again, the same is converted. One word which is converted into another form. So, and then synesthesia. Synesthesia is a very interesting thing which authors use when they blend human senses. They blend human senses like blind mouths. That particular line, this is referring to the clergy. Blind mouths that scarce themselves know how to hold. A mouth is not for seeing, but here blind mouth is used by the poet, referring to the clergy. So he's using it in a certain way which is not, it's not used normally. Okay, and then you have enjambment. Enjambment, of course, is the thought of a particular line which is continued into the next line to illustrate the thought. Daily devours apace and nothing sped, but that two-handed engine the door stands ready to smite once and smite no more. Imagery is, of course, something which Milton is very skilled in, and he has all these dreamy passages in the following lines. That on the green turf sucked the honeyed showers, and purple all the ground with vernal flowers. Bring the rain, primrose that forsaken dies, the tufted croto and pale jessamine, the pink, the white pink, and the pansy freaked with jeet, the glowing violet. That visual image which you get of the flowers and nature, that is Milton. His skill is here in these lines. Okay, you have rhetoric questions, which are basically questions which you say you do not expect. You do not expect an answer. That is a rhetorical question. So that is your when you're making a point. Closed over the head of your loved Lycidas, ah, who has reft, quoth he, my dearest pledge. These are lines which are an example of rhetoric. Poem structure, the rhyme scheme is a irregular rhyme scheme of the Italian canzone, featuring multiple voices. There's no clear separation of Christian and classical voices of the poem. The elements are quite fused, and you can't identify them as individual structures. And the movements, each movement begins with one invocation, investigating the tradition of classical pastoral elegies, and ending with maybe one or more Christian solution of the emotional problem which is presented in the particular stanza. The title means Lycidas is it is there in many places. It's a name in Greek mythology. It's a common shepherd's name, and it's there in Theocritus's Idyllus, where Lycidas is a goatherd, in Ovid's Metamorphosis as a centaur, and in Virgil also. Okay. I have included something which I have just put heading as criticism. This you can have these little extra things which you can put in your answer when you get a question if it is applicable. So Milton, while everyone has praised him and everything, he has also been criticized. I've just mentioned a couple of things. His usage of synocope to preserve the rhyme has been criticized because it is a bit distracting. The flow breaks. There's a break in the flow because of that. Then his usage of hyperbole in the pastoral tradition, that is supposed to be by some people have considered, and they think that is an exaggeration, an overstatement. And there has been a particular debate whether King and Milton were really that close or not. And King, about whom Milton has said in such glowing terms, he has presented his King's genius. He is not very very exceptional according to what information we've got now. So when he says all nature wept for him, that again would be a little bit too much. Okay, Milton's poem has been criticized for the lack of unity, and his poem has got three distinct sections. It's filled with the loss of, first has got this loss of poetic fame, second with focuses on corrupt clergy, and the adulation of Lycidas, of course. Right. Okay. I think we'll go to the RTC now, and weep no more, shepherds, weep no more. For Lycidas, your sorrow is not dead. Sunk though he be beneath the watery floor, so sinks the day star in the ocean bed. Milton's famed pastoral elegy, it's a dirge or a pastoral elegy. Dirge is also something similar. It's written in the honor of his former classmate for his death. These are some of the features of a pastoral elegy. Speaker is a shepherd. The lament is for another shepherd. Muse is invoked. Expression of grief is abundant at the poet's loss. There's a procession of mourners. The poem uses a medium of satire to talk about the corrupt clergy. The futility of cruel fate is expressed. There is symbolism over here, floral symbolism. Nature is sympathetic with the poet's grief. Nature is also crying with the poem. A statement is made in belief of immortality. Okay, that is there, and resignation and acceptance that everything, whatever happens, is happened for the best. So Lycidas is mourning. Lycidas' death is mourned by the speaker. The loss of his good friend. He is presented in the stanza with in the beginning. That is, in the beginning, at the beginning, he's presented with evergreen laurels that symbolize creative writing. So what we see are two friends who are very close, who shared in their joys and sorrows. The lines are 23 and 24. For we were nursed upon the self same hill, fed the same flock by fountain, shade and rill. Yeah, and the poem takes a turn in the lines above, and the speaker later on he states, according the lines of the RTC, that there is no need to weep or cry over Lycidas. In line 166, he says, Lycidas is not dead in one sense. In one sense, he is not dead. Physical sense, he is dead. His body, which is drowned at sea, it will rise like the sun. Why would it rise? Because he believes that Christ will mediate, Christ will do something for his friend, and he will rise again and he will join the communion, the collective, the gathering of saints. So the tone changes with the poet rejoicing for his friend, and he is happy that his friend is going to be in a joyful place even after death. Death Star is a reference to the sun, which sinks into the ocean but rises the next day. So again, that is a comparison. And Lycidas might rise again, but not in the particular way we know, not in a physical way. Anon repairs means to appear right away or soon, which happens when the sun appears soon. Once it goes to the ocean floor, it appears again. Okay, by writing a pastoral elegy, Milton positions himself at the end of a long tradition of classical poets like Theocritus and Virgil. And even as he mourns his friend, he establishes a claim to literary fame through a poem that will compare him with the classical greats. So that's it. Uh, I hope you enjoyed it. And
Spending some time with us, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss another video. We also handpicked these videos, which we recommend you watch next, and we'll see you back tomorrow.